Unaware she had just inherited the company her husband worked for, she watched him walk out of their mansion with a cold smile after emptying their $500 million joint account, believing he'd won. He thought divorcing her and marrying his mistress would finally secure his freedom and fortune. But he didn't know the empire he was about to serve now belonged to the woman he betrayed. She lost everything, her marriage, her trust, her love, but gained something far greater, power. And when he showed up at work, confident and unbothered, the look on his face when he saw who was sitting in the CEO's chair changed everything. But what exactly did she do that left him frozen in disbelief? Did she fire him on the spot, or make him beg for the job he once mocked her for never understanding? And when the mistress realized who now signed her paychecks, how far would revenge go? The night it all began shimmered with chandeliers and deceit. Inside the grand ballroom of the Langston Hotel, laughter floated among Manhattan's elite as camera flashes captured what looked like perfection. A billionaire couple, dressed in silver and pride. She stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his sleeve, her diamond bracelet catching the light. To the world, she was the picture of grace. Evelyn Cole, the quiet wife of America's financial prodigy, Adrian Cole. But behind the poised smile, she felt the fracture widening. The whispers had started weeks ago, carried by polite voices at charity luncheons and luxury brunches. Rumors of Adrian's affair with a PR executive named Betrayal. Evelyn had ignored them at first, convincing herself that the cruelty of wealth often came in the form of gossip. But tonight, the whispers weren't whispers anymore. They were murmurs too loud to be mistaken for anything else. When Betrayal strutted toward her across the ballroom, clad in crimson satin that glowed like sin under the chandeliers, the room seemed to hold its breath. Adrian's eyes flicked to her, a warning disguised as indifference. Betrayal smiled, thin, sharp, triumphant, and in one graceful motion stumbled forward, letting a glass of red wine cascade over Evelyn's silver gown. Gasps broke out. Cameras turned. Adrian didn't rush to help. He didn't even flinch. He laughed, low, condescending, humiliating. "Careful, sweetheart," he said to Betrayal, brushing her shoulder. Silver was never really her color anyway. The laughter that followed sliced through Evelyn's composure like glass. Her throat tightened, but she refused to cry. Instead, she excused herself, each step measured, her soaked gown clinging to her as she crossed the ballroom. The restroom door shut behind her with a soft thud that echoed like a closing chapter. Under the harsh vanity lights, she saw her reflection, wine-stained, humiliated, but strangely calm. Her pulse slowed. The ache in her chest hardened into something colder, something precise. She touched the mirror, fingers trembling slightly as her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Power is quiet, Evie. It doesn't shout. It waits." She stood there for a long moment, watching her reflection shift from broken to resolute. The humiliation wasn't her ending. It was her ignition. And in that silence, a new thought began to bloom, something he'd never expect. When she stepped out of the restroom, the gala lights seemed different, sharper, louder. She walked past him without looking, past Betrayal's smirk, past the mocking eyes. She went straight to the valet, slipped into the back seat of her car, and stared out the tinted window at the glowing towers of the city that once felt like a cage. The next morning, silence filled their penthouse, a silence Adrian enjoyed. He sipped his espresso while scrolling through the tabloids, the headlines gleaming with her humiliation. CEO's wife soaked in scandal. He laughed, a cruel, careless sound. "You made the front page, Evie," he said, not looking up. "Maybe you should thank Betrayal for finally giving you some relevance." She said nothing. She simply watched him, her hands folded in her lap, noting every careless word. Then as he adjusted his cufflinks, he added, "After I close this $8.4 billion deal next week, I'll be filing for divorce. It's time we both move on." Something inside her went still. Not broken, still, the kind of stillness that precedes a storm. When he left for work, she wandered into his study. The scent of cedar and bourbon lingered in the air. She wasn't sure what she was looking for until she saw a folder on his desk labeled Acquisition Coal Industries. Her father's company, her late father, The man who built everything from nothing, whose trust in Adrian had been his final mistake. She opened the folder and froze. Inside were documents, contracts bearing her name and signature, her signature. But she had never signed them. Her heart pounded as she compared each page. The strokes identical yet wrong. A forged signature. Her authority used to transfer ownership of her father's company into Adrian's name years ago. The realization hit her like an electric current. He hadn't just betrayed her, he had stolen everything. And as she sank into the leather chair, the pieces began to align in her mind. The sudden marriage proposal after her father's death, the pressure to merge their accounts, the quiet isolation from the board. He had built his empire on her silence. She looked toward the window, the skyline gleaming with deceit, and whispered almost to herself, "Not anymore." That night, she called her father's old lawyer. The old lawyer's office in Midtown smelled of dust, mahogany, and memory. The brass plaque on the door still read, "Thompson and Gray, corporate law since 1968. When Evelyn stepped inside, the past felt close enough to touch. Mr. Gray, now in his 70s, rose slowly from behind his desk, his eyes softening when he saw her. "Evelyn Cole," he said gently. "Or should I say Evelyn Harper, your father's daughter." Her throat tightened. "It's been a while, Mr. Gray." He gestured for her to sit, studying her with a kind of paternal concern. "I read about the gala," he said. "You remind me so much of your father. You don't flinch in front of wolves." "I flinched," she said quietly, "but I learned." When she placed the folder on his desk and opened it to reveal the forged contract, his expression changed. His hands, old but steady, turned the pages slowly, his brow furrowing deeper with each signature. "These are not legitimate. Your signature was notarized after your father's death by a notary who no longer works in New York. This isn't just fraud, Evelyn. This is corporate theft on a federal scale." She exhaled, almost in relief. "So I'm not imagining it." "No," he said, leaning back. "Your husband, Adrian Cole, illegally transferred your father's controlling shares into his holding company. Every dollar he's made since then, every acquisition, every merger, it's all built on stolen foundation." Silence filled the room, heavy but clear. Evelyn sat straighter. "Then it's mine," she said, the words landing with quiet conviction. "Every company he owns, every asset built on that theft, it's mine." Mr. Gray nodded slowly. "Legally, yes, but to prove it, you'll need evidence stronger than forged ink. You'll need internal documents, financial trails, witnesses. You'll need to expose the structure from within." Her mind began to race, not with panic, but precision. "Then I'll go inside," she said. "I'll play the wife he believes I am until I know where every skeleton is buried." The lawyer looked at her for a long time, perhaps searching for fear. Instead, he found resolve. "Your father would be proud," he murmured. "He always said, 'My daughter has my fire. She just doesn't know it yet.'" When she left the office, the November air bit cold against her cheeks, but something inside her had shifted. Clarity, calm, and an emerging hunger for justice. That night, she returned to the penthouse. Adrian was on the balcony, cigar in hand. Brielle draped lazily across his lap like a trophy. Evelyn entered quietly, her steps soft, her face unreadable. "Hey, sweetheart," Adrian said without turning. "Grab us some coffee, would you? Make it strong." Her fingers tightened around the tray she was carrying, but her voice was smooth. "Of course." As she walked back into the kitchen, she smiled faintly. Every act of obedience was now armor. Every cup of coffee she poured was a mask for strategy. That night, while they slept, she went to the guest room and opened her laptop. She began building what she called the reconstruction, an encrypted file containing every lead, every connection, every proof she would gather. She started small, old transaction records, internal emails, board meeting notes. Then she reached out to her first ally, Liam Hayes, her father's former finance director, who had resigned shortly after Adrian's takeover. When Liam answered her late-night message, his reply was immediate. "I knew something was wrong. Meet me tomorrow. I kept copies." The following morning, Evelyn met Liam in a quiet cafe in Soho. He looked worn, older than she remembered, but his eyes still burned with loyalty. I warned your father, he said. Adrian wanted control too fast. When your father died, he buried me in non-compete clauses. But I kept evidence. He handed her a flash drive. This contains financial trails leading to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Singapore. If you cross-reference these with the acquisition documents, you'll have proof of embezzlement. Evelyn held the drive tightly. You could lose everything for this. He smiled faintly. I already did. By the time she returned home, she was no longer the woman who'd stood humiliated at a gala. She was the woman who understood the weight of patience. Days turned into weeks. Each morning she played the part. Soft, composed, invisible. She served Adrian breakfast, smiled at the mistress, attended events, and remained silent while they discussed deals she now secretly dismantled. Behind the scenes, she built a quiet army. Former employees fired unjustly, accountants who had seen too much, and a cyber specialist named Aria, her old college friend, who knew how to trace hidden money. Under Evelyn's calm direction, Aria unearthed encrypted files showing millions siphoned from company accounts into Adrian's personal holdings. Every dollar he's stolen, Aria said over the phone, is traceable. We can burn him from the inside out. Not yet, Evelyn replied. We wait until the right eyes are watching. At night, she sat by the window, the city below reflecting against the glass. The skyline no longer looked unreachable. It looked fragile, ready to crack. One evening, as Adrian boasted to a journalist about his upcoming $8.4 billion merger, Evelyn watched from the corner of the room, her expression soft but knowing. She could already see how it would end, the same way he had once seen her fall. But this time, the collapse would be his. And as the cameras flashed, she caught his reflection in the window, his smirk, his arrogance, and smiled faintly. Keep laughing, she thought. You're laughing in the house I already own. Mornings in the penthouse had grown eerily mechanical. The aroma of imported coffee, the clink of porcelain cups, and the low murmur of stock tickers on the television filled the air like ritual. Adrian sat at the marble counter scrolling through market updates, while Brielle scrolled through her reflection on her phone's camera. Evelyn moved silently between them, graceful and obedient, pouring coffee with the same poise she once used to pour champagne at charity galas. Make sure it's not too bitter, Evie, Brielle said, not glancing up. Adrian likes it smooth. Evelyn smiled faintly. Of course. Neither of them noticed how her gaze lingered a second longer on Adrian's phone screen, where an email from Kensworth Global Investments blinked open, confirming the final date for his $8.4 billion merger. The culmination of years of deception, the peak before the fall. As she placed the cups down, Adrian looked up, eyes cool and distant. The lawyers will be here tonight to finalize the media briefing. I want you out of the house when they arrive. You'll only distract. I understand, she said softly, eyes lowered. I'll visit a friend. He smirked, dismissing her presence entirely. But that was exactly what she needed. That afternoon, she sat in a quiet cafe with Aria, her former finance division friend turned cyber investigator. Laptops open, their conversation was masked by the hum of espresso machines and idle chatter. Aria leaned in, whispering, the offshore accounts are cleanly laundered, but his Cayman portfolio has vulnerabilities. I can route his shell companies back to coal industry's primary trust. When regulators see it, it'll trace back to the fraudulent acquisition. Evelyn nodded. Do it, but feed it anonymously, slowly. Start with the investors, then the press. He needs to feel untouchable right before it all collapses. Aria smiled. You always were the patient one. Patience, Evelyn murmured, is just strategy in disguise. For weeks, she played her dual roles to perfection. During the day, she was the serene wife, attending charity galas beside him, accepting polite pity from the same women who once whispered about her humiliation. By night, she was the invisible architect dismantling his empire one file at a time. She sent anonymous packets to key figures, an investigative journalist from the Ledger, 2 major investors, and a senior analyst from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Each envelope contained fragments of evidence, wire transfers, forged documents, shell company charts. Not enough to indict, but enough to raise eyebrows and plant questions. Within days, Adrian's office buzzed with whispers. Regulators asking questions? One executive muttered. Anonymous leaks? Another whispered in the hallway. Evelyn pretended not to notice the tension tightening his posture each morning. She only smiled when he snapped at Betrayal, when his tone sharpened on phone calls, when his laughter grew thinner. Then came the evening he found her in the study. She had left her book open on the armchair, and the fireplace flickering low. Adrian stepped in, eyes suspicious. "You've been quiet lately," he said, swirling a glass of whiskey. "Too quiet. That should worry me." She met his gaze calmly. "Should it?" His lips curved into a faint smile. "You were never good at hiding your emotions, Evie. You act different when you're scheming." "I stopped scheming when I realized you always win," she said softly, her tone almost convincing. "I'm tired of fighting what I can't change." He looked satisfied, walking past her toward the balcony. "Good. That's the wife I married." When the door closed behind him, her reflection in the window shifted, no longer submissive, but sharpened with intent. The next morning, headlines hinted at irregularities within Cole Holdings. Investors demanded transparency. Adrian dismissed it all with a laugh during breakfast. "Rumors," he said confidently. "People get jealous when you're successful." Evelyn's fork paused over her plate. "But what if the regulators dig deeper?" He shot her a cold look. "You wouldn't understand corporate politics, Evie. Stick to charities and clothes." She smiled, lowering her gaze again. "Of course." That evening, she called Mr. Gray. "It's time," she said simply. "Send the documentation to the board. I'll handle the rest." He hesitated. "Evelyn, once this begins, there's no going back. His reputation will be destroyed." "It already is," she replied. "The world just hasn't seen it yet." The next day, she visited the company's headquarters under the pretense of delivering documents for Adrian's upcoming signing ceremony. The receptionist, unaware of the storm she carried, smiled politely as Evelyn handed over a sealed envelope. Inside were the proofs, every forged signature, every shell company, every offshore account linked back to Adrian's fraud. She watched the courier take it to the top floor, where the boardroom lights glowed like an altar. That night, as Adrian celebrated in their penthouse with Betrayal and several executives, Evelyn moved through the crowd quietly, a glass of champagne untouched in her hand. The laughter was loud, the arrogance thicker than the scent of cigar smoke. He wrapped an arm around Betrayal, his voice booming. "Tomorrow marks the start of a new era, our biggest merger yet. 8.4 billion, ladies and gentlemen. We've made history." Everyone cheered. Evelyn smiled faintly, setting her glass down. "Yes," she said softly, almost to herself. "History." When midnight came, she slipped away to the study. On her desk, her phone buzzed. An encrypted message from Arya. "Everything's ready. The regulators and media will receive the full report by 9 a.m. Your move." Evelyn typed a simple reply. "Let him enjoy his last night." She closed her laptop and looked out at the city, its towers glittering with the same deceptive beauty as her marriage. Tomorrow, she thought, everything changes. For years, Adrian had believed her silence was weakness. Tomorrow, he would learn that silence was strategy. And for the first time, Evelyn allowed herself to whisper the truth that had been growing inside her since that night at the gala. "He built his empire on my name. I'll bury it with mine." The morning of the signing ceremony dawned bright, cruel, and perfectly still. The kind of day made for triumphs and downfalls. The Langston Tower shimmered against the New York skyline, the same tower where, years ago, her humiliation had begun. Now the building belonged to her by law, though no one yet knew it. Inside, the boardroom buzzed with investors, lawyers, and reporters. Adrian Cole stood at the head of the long glass table, charm oozing through every gesture. Cameras clicked as he adjusted his tie, greeting journalists with his trademark grin. To him, it was Victory Day, the closing of an $8.4 billion merger that would solidify his place among the world's most powerful men. Then the doors opened, and Evelyn stepped in. She was no longer the quiet wife in soft colors. She wore a tailored gray suit that sculpted her form, her hair pinned back, her steps deliberate. In her hands, a sealed envelope, the one that could erase his empire in a heartbeat. Every conversation in the room faded to silence. "Evelyn," Adrian said, his smirk faltering for the first time. "What are you doing here?" Delivering something, she said simply, her voice even. He laughed lightly, trying to regain control. You can wait outside. This meeting is confidential. She walked closer, the heels of her shoes echoing like a countdown. It concerns the deal, she said, placing the envelope on the table. I thought the board might want to review some details before signing. The investors glanced between them, uncertainty rippling like static. Adrian's smile stiffened. Evelyn, this is not... She cut him off. You built this empire on forged contracts, on documents signed under my name without consent. You stole my father's company and every dollar that followed. The room went still. Reporters froze, pens hovering midair. One of the board members frowned. Is this true? Adrian barked a laugh, but his voice trembled. This is absurd. My wife is confused. She doesn't understand business law. Evelyn reached into the envelope and laid out the papers, photocopies of every falsified contract, notarization discrepancies, and bank transfers leading to offshore accounts. Her tone remained calm, surgical. The Securities and Exchange Commission received copies this morning. So did the ledger. Gasps filled the air. Phones began buzzing. One investor whispered sharply to another. Adrian's color drained from his face as he snatched the documents, scanning the pages, his confidence disintegrating word by word. This is a setup, he muttered. How did you... She met his eyes for the first time, steady and unblinking. You taught me how to watch, Adrian. You just never realized I was learning. Security officers appeared at the door. A corporate liaison whispered something to the head of the board, who nodded gravely. Mr. Cole, we've received a notice of investigation. Until further review, all contracts and financial activities are frozen. Adrian's voice broke into a shout. You can't do this. This is my company. Evelyn straightened. No, Adrian, it's mine, legally, and you've been working for me all along. The revelation cracked through the air like lightning. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and the Mistress Betrayal, who stood near the door in a pale dress, stumbled backward, pale as marble. Evie, Adrian pleaded now, the arrogance gone. Please, we can fix this. I did it for us. She tilted her head, studying him with quiet detachment. You did it for you, and now you'll answer for it. Security escorted him out as the media swarmed. Betrayal tried to follow, but the investors turned away, already whispering about damage control and criminal liability. The world Adrian built on deceit collapsed in real time. Stock prices plummeting on live feeds, headlines flashing, billionaire fraud exposed, CEO's empire built on forgery. Evelyn remained still amid the chaos. Power didn't need to shout, it only needed to exist. By afternoon, Adrian Cole's accounts were frozen, his merger terminated, and his name trending across every major network. The same man who once mocked her in front of a crowd now stood outside the company he'd stolen, surrounded by reporters, begging for mercy. When he showed up at her mansion later that night, the cameras followed. Rain poured as he stood at the gates, drenched and desperate. Evie, he shouted, please, I have nothing left. You can't do this to me. From the upstairs window, she watched silently, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the chandelier. Paparazzi lights flickered below, capturing his ruin. For a brief moment, pity flickered inside her. But then she remembered the red wine, the laughter, her father's stolen name. She turned away, drawing the curtain shut. The rain swallowed his voice. 2 weeks later, Evelyn sat in her late father's old office in Queens, a modest, quiet space that smelled of dust and pine. The sign outside now read Harper Foundation. She'd restored the company under its true name, redirecting its fortune into community housing and small business grants in his honor. As sunlight poured through the blinds, she placed a wine glass on her desk, not filled with wine, but with amber marbles, each one catching the light like captured embers. Her private reminder, each marble represented a lesson learned. Silence, dignity, patience. She smiled faintly. The woman who once stood humiliated under chandeliers now ruled from integrity, not vengeance, but she would never forget the night that birthed her power. Outside her office window, the city hummed as if bowing to a new rhythm, hers, and in that stillness, she whispered the truth that had carried her from ruin to rebirth. He stole my name to build his empire, but I took it back to rebuild the world. The marbles glimmered quietly in the glass, reflecting her face in the skyline beyond. A reminder that victory isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the sound of a curtain closing on the man who thought he owned you, and the quiet breath of a woman who finally owns herself. The morning after the storm, the tabloids screamed with his name. Disgraced billionaire faces federal charges. Wife exposes 8.4B corporate fraud. Adrian Cole, from power to prison. Each headline was a shard of justice sharpened by truth. But to Evelyn, they were simply noise, echoes of a past she'd already buried. The world had chosen sides overnight. Investors who once toasted Adrian's genius now erased his name from portfolios. Friends who had smiled at their dinner table suddenly claimed they'd always suspected something was off. And Betrayal, the woman who'd once basked in red silk and arrogance, was now a ghost in tabloid margins, seen leaving a luxury spa in tears, her career destroyed by association. Evelyn watched it all unfold from her study window, coffee cooling untouched beside her. She had imagined this moment countless times, the silence after the storm, the satisfaction of justice. But what she felt now wasn't triumph. It was an ache. Not regret, but the quiet hollowness of finally standing on the ashes of everything she'd once loved. Mr. Gray visited that afternoon. His expression was solemn but proud. The federal indictment will proceed. The evidence you provided is airtight. Adrian could face 20 years. Evelyn nodded, her voice calm. He'll have time to think. He's been asking to speak with you, the lawyer added. Her gaze flickered. I expected that. He's in holding until the arraignment. Do you want me to decline? For a long moment she said nothing. Then softly, no, I'll go. Later that evening, she entered the Metropolitan Detention Center under the guise of a legal visit. The air inside felt heavy, sterile, metallic, unforgiving. When Adrian was brought into the visitation room, he looked like a shadow of himself. The perfectly tailored suits were gone, replaced by a standard orange jumpsuit. His arrogance had melted into something smaller, something human. Evie, he said, his voice cracking. You came. She studied him quietly. You wanted to see me. He nodded, eyes hollow. I didn't mean for it to end like this. I lost control. The company, the money, it all started because I wanted to prove I could build something bigger than your father ever did. But when he died and everything became yours, he stopped, running a trembling hand through his hair. I thought if I could own it, it would mean I mattered. Evelyn's throat tightened, but her voice stayed level. You already mattered. You just wanted more. He swallowed hard. I loved you, you know. Even when I was destroying you, I loved you. She blinked slowly, fighting the storm behind her eyes. That's not love, Adrian. That's hunger wearing a mask. He leaned forward, desperate. Evie, please, they're freezing my assets. I'll lose everything. I don't have anyone left. For a fleeting second, she almost pitied him. But then she remembered the red wine on her gown, the laughter in that ballroom, the years of silence while he drained her father's legacy. I gave you everything, she said softly, and you turned it into a weapon. He reached out, his hands pressed against the glass. Please, you can stop this. Her answer was gentle but final. I already did. You just never noticed when I stopped fighting for you and started fighting because of you. She stood and turned to leave. His voice broke behind her. Evie, please, just tell them I wasn't the monster they think I am. She paused at the door, her reflection glimmering faintly in the glass between them. Then stop proving them right. When she stepped outside, the evening air hit her face like freedom. The cameras waiting at the gate called her name, but she walked past them silently. She didn't owe the world an explanation. The truth was already loud enough. That night, in her empty mansion, she found herself wandering the halls like a ghost. The house that once echoed with parties and false laughter now felt cavernous, stripped of meaning. She paused by the grand piano, running her fingers along the keys. Her reflection in its glossy surface seemed like someone else's, stronger, older, untouchable. For the first time, she realized the difference between winning and healing. She had won, but healing Healing would take time. The next morning, she instructed her team to sell the mansion. "I want to move the foundation's headquarters to Queens," she said, "back where my father started." Her assistant blinked in surprise. "Ma'am, that's, unconventional." Evelyn smiled faintly. So was he. As news broke that the mansion had been sold and the coal fortune redistributed to fund community housing projects, the media hailed her as the woman who redefined power. But Evelyn didn't crave the praise. She only wanted peace. Still, the world kept calling. Reporters requesting interviews, investors offering partnerships, philanthropists eager to collaborate. She agreed to none of it. Instead, she visited her father's old neighborhood quietly, walking past the brick buildings and small stores that still bore faded Harper Supplies logos. One elderly shopkeeper recognized her. "Your father would have been proud, sweetheart," he said. "He used to say, 'My girl's going to do something big one day.'" Evelyn smiled, warmth flickering in her chest. He was right about that. As she drove home, the city lights blurred outside the window, shimmering like distant stars. For the first time in years, she felt light, not victorious, but whole. She whispered into the night, almost like a prayer, "It's over." But she didn't yet know that her story wasn't done, because power, once awakened, never sleeps. 2 weeks later, dawn broke over Queens with a warmth that felt different. The sky wasn't a skyline of glass towers, but of possibility. Pale gold spilling over rooftops where laundry hung and street vendors shouted over the rumble of buses. Evelyn stepped out of a modest black car in front of a red brick building bearing a faded sign, Harper Industries, her father's name, her true inheritance. She had returned not as a broken woman, but as the rightful owner of everything that had been stolen from her. Gone were the diamond necklaces and couture gowns. In their place, a tailored gray suit, simple pearl earrings, and a steady resolve that radiated quiet authority. Inside the old office, dust still clung to the blinds, and the air carried that faint scent of paper and machine oil. The same desk where her father once sat still stood in the corner, its wood worn by time. On it rested a single object she'd placed there the night before, a clear wine glass filled with amber marbles. A reminder of the night her humiliation became her rebirth. Mr. Montgomery Gray entered with a stack of folders and a proud smile. "The papers are ready. The board officially recognized you as CEO this morning. The Harper Foundation will own controlling shares of Coal Global under its new name." She smiled faintly. "Harper & Co. feels right. Not flashy, just real." He nodded. "And the first initiative?" Her voice softened. "Community housing. Affordable homes for the families who were laid off when Adrian gutted the factories. My father always said a company isn't great because it's rich. It's great because it remembers who built it." As he left, Evelyn walked to the window overlooking the bustling street. For the first time in years, she didn't see power as something to fear or prove. It was something to use, something to rebuild. Her assistant Marla peeked in. "Ma'am, there's someone waiting outside. Says he used to work here before Cole took over." Evelyn gestured to let him in. The man who entered was in his 50s, wearing a faded uniform jacket with grease-stained cuffs. He removed his cap nervously. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say thank you. When Cole shut this place down, I lost my job. My wife's been sick since. But the papers say you're reopening the factory. If that's true, it's true," Evelyn said gently, "and I'd like you to be part of it again." His eyes glistened. "We thought no one remembered us." "I remember," she said softly. "Every name, every story." When he left, Evelyn sat for a moment in silence, letting the sound of the city seep in, the honking, the chatter, the heartbeat of the world she'd almost lost touch with. That afternoon, she visited the project site, an abandoned complex her father once dreamed of turning into housing. She walked through the rusted gates, imagining what would soon stand there. Families laughing, children playing, people living. For the first time, she wasn't chasing legacy, she was continuing one. As she stood there, a black car approached. Her security detail tensed, but she raised a hand. The door opened, and Adrian stepped out. He looked gaunt, dressed in a plain suit that didn't quite fit. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something like exhaustion. He stopped a few feet away, uncertain. Evelyn, he said quietly. She regarded him with the calm of someone who'd already said goodbye long ago. You shouldn't be here. I had to see you, he murmured. I signed the plea deal. They're giving me 7 years. I'll pay back what I can. She nodded slowly. Good. He looked around, taking in the empty site. So this is what you're doing with it all? Houses for workers? You always wanted to save people. I'm not saving anyone, she replied evenly. I'm rebuilding what greed destroyed. Adrian exhaled, then gave a faint, bitter smile. You were always stronger than me. I thought power was about control. But you made it look like grace. For the first time, she saw sincerity in his eyes. Not manipulation, not calculation, just regret. I don't hate you anymore, she said softly. I don't forgive you either. But I hope you learn what power actually means. He nodded, defeated but grateful. I already have. She turned away as he walked back to his car, the wind lifting strands of her hair like the closing of a chapter. That night, in her father's office, she sat at the desk under the golden glow of a single lamp. She looked at the glass of amber marbles and smiled faintly. Each marble symbolized a moment she had chosen: silence over vengeance, dignity over rage, patience over panic. Power, she realized, wasn't in taking control. It was in becoming unshakable. She opened her father's old journal and added one line beneath his last entry. The company is home again. Then she stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the flickering city lights. The same lights that once witnessed her humiliation, now reflecting her victory not through noise, but through peace. In the distance, a billboard still bore Adrian's faded face beside the word Empire. Soon, it would be replaced with a new slogan she'd written herself: Integrity builds forever. As the night deepened, Evelyn raised the wine glass in silent salute. To her father, to her past, to every wound that had turned into wisdom. The amber marbles shimmered under the lamplight like tiny suns. She whispered, almost to herself, unaware I inherited the company he worked for. He divorced me for his mistress. But what I did when he showed up at work changed everything. And then, with quiet grace, she placed the glass on her desk, turned off the light, and walked away. Not as the woman who had been betrayed, but as the woman who had rebuilt her world.